Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones, back here today as we enter the final 2 weeks of the regular season. Purdue sits here at 24-4. They are 13-4 in Big Ten play, fresh off of a dominating win over Ohio State on Sunday in Mackey Arena, to bounce back a little bit after they'd lost 3 of their previous 4 games. So now, 2 weeks to go, the NCAA Tournament Selection Committee has given their thoughts on where the Boilermakers stack up. There is plenty to talk about today, so let's get on into it. Real quick, we're going now to 2 episodes per week. So I will record a midweek episode here. Obviously, we will preview the Indiana game. That game could have Big Ten ramifications. Talk a little bit more about that here momentarily, but I'll need a number of mailbag questions to pull off the midweek episode this week with not as much to talk about. No games this week. Purdue finally has some much needed rest time. They've been, of the last few weeks here, they've played one more game than the rest of the Big Ten. That finally evens out here. So Purdue has some time off. Going to be a great time to dive into the mailbag, answer some of your questions, start sending them over on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. I would love to have this thing full, would love to go as long as we can. As many questions as you guys want to ask, I'm all in. Let's do this. Let's make it a cool episode. So send it over on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. Follow there if you don't already. And be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. There is so much to talk about here over the next month and a half, however long Purdue is playing. So be sure to follow along on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss anything. We're down to 3 games left in the regular season. It was kind of that nice, sunny, warm day that you get in February sometimes at Mackey Arena today that tells you that the end is near. The end of the regular season is near. March Madness is close. We're in that time of year. Purdue, since the last time we talked, Purdue lost at Maryland 68-54, and they beat Ohio State comfortably 82-55 earlier today, recording this on Sunday night in Mackey Arena. So again, Purdue sits at 24-4 overall, 13-4 in the Big Ten, 3 games to go. I don't want to talk too much about that Purdue-Maryland game because just in general, enough time has passed to where it's not the most relevant topic anymore. And I don't want to just sit here and talk about yesterday's news, so to speak. But I think that game was one of those incidents where the old saying, it looks a lot worse than it actually is. I think that applies to the Purdue-Maryland game because during the game, the optics were bad. Purdue really, Purdue was playing them just fine. Purdue was up a couple, I think they were up 6 or 8 points, and then it just flipped. It just on a dime. Maryland went on, I don't remember what it was, but a 29-4 run, something like that. I don't remember the exact number, but Maryland buried Purdue, and it happened just like that. So when you were watching that live and when you were experiencing it, it was the first time that this Purdue team had lost uncomfortably, lost in a blowout type setting. The Rutgers game was tight. The Indiana game, Purdue came back big late. They led most of the game at Northwestern. The Maryland game got out of control. And, Purdue was doing just fine, and then they just kind of lost their heads. Certainly the officiating played a big factor in that. I think there is some real frustration that's built up from the Purdue side of things as it pertains to officiating. Certainly Purdue was not happy with the way the Northwestern game was called. I don't think they were happy with the lack of fouls called against the guy guarding Zach Edey against Maryland. But, Purdue lost that game by enough that they didn't have much of a gripe. They couldn't really say a whole lot about the officiating when they got run out in the second half the way they did. I think a lot of that frustration just boiled over, and Purdue kind of lost their head. The end result wasn't pretty, but look, that Maryland game was a game that wasn't a scheduled loss by any means, but it shouldn't have surprised you that Purdue lost that game. That's a tough place to win. It always has been. Think about how many weird games Purdue's had there over the years. There have been plenty. If I recall, the 2018-19 team, the Elite Eight team that won the Big Ten, if I recall, they got buried there too. So it happens. I mean, it's not the end of the world. That did make that Northwestern loss hurt a little bit more, just because that one wasn't as expected. But Purdue bounced back really well against Ohio State today. Completely ran Ohio State out of the gym. And look, all of this about Ohio State comes with the acknowledgement that, I'm not close enough to the Ohio State program to know what's going on there, but it's a disaster and it makes no sense. I think Chris Holtmann is a good coach. I have no reason to think that this is just some god-awful coaching job. I think they have really talented players. Like, we know Bryce Sensabaugh is a stud. Justice Suing has been around a while. He's a good player. Sean McNeil can really shoot it. Ice Likely is a solid player. Like, these guys are good players, but whatever is going on there right now, it's a mess. They've lost 8 straight games now. They're going to play on Wednesday of the Big Ten tournament. They're going to finish under 500. I mean, things are bad. Bad with Ohio State, but you can only play who's on your schedule. Probably one of my favorite quotes I've ever heard, because it's so true. You can only play who's on your schedule, and that's who Purdue was scheduled to play on Sunday, and they took care of business. It came at a good time. Purdue needed a win. Ohio State had given me no reason to think that they were going to fight if Purdue got up big. That's why I had tweeted before the game. It's a big deal if Purdue can get off to a good start here. And while they turned it over on their first 2 possessions, ultimately, Purdue did enough to the point where they were able to have the game tied at the first media timeout, and that game couldn't have started poor for Purdue. At that point, I thought Purdue was going to be all right, and, Purdue cruised. It was a game that was a little bit more like what we saw in non-conference play, where Purdue racked up a ton of fouls on their opponent. They pulled down a massive share of rebounds. They won the rebounding battle big time, and they just kind of cruised. It was a pretty easy win for Purdue. They were able to get some guys a little bit more rest. I think that is a really nice factor that maybe flew under the radar a little bit. Looking at it, Mason Gillis only plays 18 minutes. Ethan Morton just 21. Braden Smith 24. Fletcher Lawyer 26. Edey 25. These guys are normally playing in the 30s, with the exception of Gillis from that list. So that was nice for Purdue, and a win that came at a good time, builds up a little bit more optimism and it should put the doom and gloomers to rest for the week. Keyword should, but it should help keep people a little bit more optimistic here moving forward. A couple thoughts here from the week. A lot of talk about Purdue's handling of the press, of ball pressure, of the full court press. Ball pressure in the half court remains an area where Purdue struggled, but the folks out on Twitter that just scream, "Oh, Purdue can't handle a full court press," yada yada. I think we saw this week that that's just not true. Purdue only had 7 turnovers against Maryland. Maybe 1 or 2 of them were in the backcourt. That game just was kind of a blur in the second half, and Purdue had some turnovers early, but they weren't in the backcourt. They weren't on the press, and Maryland pressed until that game was comfortably theirs. And then Ohio State pressed after every single made basket in this game, and I don't think Purdue had a single backcourt turnover. I think this is just a narrative that, exists from year to year. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not. I don't think this year's Purdue team really struggles against the press. I mean, they struggled against Iowa's press on a day where Iowa could be really aggressive. They had some turnovers against Northwestern, but all in all, I don't think the full court press is this magic wand against Purdue that maybe some of the thought is that it is. Ethan Morton got a lot more aggressive in the press break, and I think that really helps Purdue. Braden Smith is really good in the press and in pretty much every aspect of ball handling. Braden Smith's been really good for you, but getting Ethan Morton to be aggressive with the basketball helps quite a bit. I think he's starting to regain some confidence in himself. Just in general, he got a pair of threes to fall earlier. One right in the first half, one right in the second half, early on in both. To see that fall, I think, is a real positive. He's more comfortable with the ball in his hands. He didn't look all that comfortable against Maryland. I think maybe it was just a good building block against Ohio State. Certainly on defense, he was excellent. He was doing a nice job on Bryce Sensabaugh, forcing tough shots, then gets switched over to Sean McNeil, cools him off. He did a really good job. Ethan Morton's not a perfect player, and I think most certainly he's been the guy who has been subject to the most criticism from Purdue fans this year. Right, wrong, or indifferent, that's just how it's played out. If he plays like he did on Sunday against Ohio State, that's a really valuable piece to have. If he can knock down that open jump shot, if he can help just facilitate the basketball, he's a really strong defender. Ethan Morton's a better player than a lot of folks give him credit for. And one thing about him, too, is he's remarkably self-aware. I was down, listening to the post-game press conference when, he said something along the lines of, I'm kind of the 5th option on offense, and if I can just do literally anything, it really helps the team. I mean, for a guy who scored, 26 points a game in high school and was Pennsylvania Mr. Basketball, that's some self-awareness there. He's an interesting guy to listen to. I'm an Ethan Morton fan. In general, this team's got to knock down shots. You saw how much of a problem that was, in three of Purdue's 4 losses there. Indiana, Northwestern, and Maryland. Purdue just struggled to knock down shots. And I know the whole thing going around right now is the basketballs. Purdue playing with a Nike basketball and then an Adidas or Wilson basketball. And the 3-point shooting splits are pretty crazy. I don't know what to make of it. I know that Purdue practices with them all. They have all of them. I don't know what there is to say about all of that, but Purdue's offense is just built to be so efficient with a guy in the post who is a dominant one-on-one scorer and 4 shooters around him, so that you really have to think about doubling the post. Purdue's still doing remarkable in terms of offensive efficiency, but where they sit right now, they could use a little bit more 3-point shooting. Right now they sit number 208 in America in 3-point shooting. And I'm not going to sit here and read off all of the percentages again, like I did last week, but some consistency there is really important. It's not as much that Purdue needs to be having big time games where they shoot 50% from 3. It's that you can't have what you did against Maryland, where you go 2 for 13, like you did against Northwestern, where you go 5 for 22. I look at the first game against Maryland, 2 for 13. Rutgers, they go 7 for 23. Nebraska and Lincoln, they go 7 for 29. Like, these are the things that can't quite happen. Purdue can't afford that. That is the type of game script that gets you beat in the NCAA tournament. I think it's certainly realistic that a little bit of off time this week. I know Matt Painter said they'll have 2 off days, Monday and Wednesday. I think it's quite realistic that maybe they just need a little bit of rest time. And that's very natural, mind you. But I think maybe that's just what the doctors ordered for Purdue. The bench play is getting really up and down, and that's kind of natural of bench play. But I don't know what to make of Purdue's bench. I still don't. Trey Kaufman-Renn is starting to look more comfortable out there. And when in Big Ten play, I think we've seen him look good against a little bit of the lesser competition. Like today, Ohio State had Zed Key out. Ohio State was on a backup center for a while, and then they were on some walk-on guy that I'd never heard of. So, there's only so much you can really judge off of, but I thought he was really good. Trey Kaufman-Renn had a nice day. I think you look at some of the other games. Against Michigan, he was quite good. He was excellent in that game going up against Terrace Reed. Did some nice things against Iowa, a team that, doesn't necessarily have the best post presence. So I think he's getting better there. Mason Gillis is back in the starting lineup, but I think it's hard to really consider him or Caleb First a bench guy. Like, they're kind of both starters. I don't really know how to differentiate them. I do think Mason Gillis is probably going to start the rest of the way here. I think he is their unquestioned team leader. I enjoy listening to what these guys have to say after games, because if you listen to what Mason Gillis said and the way he just took command of that post-game press conference, you can tell that leading this team means a lot to him. He voluntarily met with the media after the Maryland game when he picked up a costly technical. A technical that partially sparked the run and kind of solidifies the argument of whether getting a technical is a good or bad thing. That was a big score for those who don't think that getting a technical works. To each their own there. But I don't know that I view the 4 spot as much of a bench, but David Jenkins Jr. and Brandon Newman coming off the bench, there's not much consistency there. David Jenkins Jr. as the backup point guard has a really important role. And it's not always the prettiest, but he gets the job done in terms of a ball handling perspective. Not a ton of turnovers there. And he's got this really crazy ability to hit buckets at the end of the shot clock. He did it again today. He missed like 2 or 3 wide open looks and then gets one at the end of the shot clock and it goes down. It makes no sense, but that's just what happens. He's not the best defender, but Purdue just needs him to knock down open shots and move the basketball. And then with Brandon Newman, and this is of course the tweet of mine that is getting the most traction from the game today, because there's quite the faction of Purdue fans that are really big fans of Brandon Newman. And he has absolutely gotten better on defense. That is not even arguable. He is leaps and bounds better this year than he was last year on the defensive end, especially on the ball. He's a pretty good on-the-ball defender. He's done a nice job off the bench there. But you see sometimes where he can be really frustrating with his shot selection. And you saw Matt Painter blow a gasket today. Really got on Brandon Newman multiple times. Took a couple of really bad shots, had a really bad turnover. And that's kind of the thing. Brandon Newman just doesn't always play like someone in their 4th year in the program. Now, I say that knowing quite well that Brandon Newman absolutely has the ability to have a game where he hits some shots and helps Purdue win. Like, you look at that Rutgers game that Purdue lost, he helped Purdue kind of stay in that thing and claw their way back into it a little bit even. He's had big moments, but the ups and downs are pretty extreme with him. He's a guy who, man, trying to have a lot of trust in him is going to be interesting to see how Purdue does with him late in the season. But, nonetheless, you're not going to get great consistency from your bench just with limited minutes. But there's going to come a time where I think Purdue needs all of those guys to step up and help. And, finally, that Ohio State game just highlighted again, Zach Edey going to win National Player of the Year. I don't think it's all that much of an argument. Certainly Trace Jackson-Davis and Jalen Wilson are having great seasons. But, man, Zach Edey, just another dominant performance. You just can't say enough about him. You really can't. Every time I kind of sit back to reflect on it and think about it, how good he's been and how just improbable his jump has been, I become more amazed every time. Just some serious credit to him. He deserves every bit of the attention he's getting right now. On Saturday, the NCAA did their top 16 bracket reveal with the selection committee. Kind of the deal they do every year. A few weeks before the tournament, they'll give you their top 16. They go through the seed lines. They put you in a hypothetical region. They got Purdue as the number 3 overall seed. And that was right around where I thought Purdue would be. I figured they would be the 3 or the 4. They've got them as the 3. They have Purdue behind Alabama and Houston, and they have Purdue ahead of Kansas. Again, right where I expected it. If you haven't seen much Alabama, they're really good. They play about as fast-paced as you could possibly imagine. But they're really good. Brandon Miller's a really good player. They play some real defense. They're a really good team. And Houston, they're sitting number 1 in the predictive metrics. They have a strong record. They played a nice non-conference schedule. Of course, the knock on them is that they don't exactly have the toughest conference schedule, which is fair. There's only so much you can do about your conference schedule, but it's not a good one. Nonetheless, they're pretty good as well. That's a really good team. So, Purdue's in this weird spot now. And talking about the NCAA tournament right now is always kind of weird because it's all anyone wants to talk about. But there's not that much to really say. Like, what is there to say with Purdue right now? They're in this weird spot where they can't really do all that much to help themselves because it's entirely dependent on what Alabama and Houston do, and Kansas to that matter, just on that one line. For Purdue to move up, A, they need to keep winning. They just need to keep winning games. But B, to move up, they need these other teams to lose games, and there's nothing Purdue can do about that. So it's a lot more likely that Purdue damages its resume and moves down than it is moves up, which isn't always the most fun thing to look at, but it also means that you're in a great spot because you can't do any higher than a 1 seed, and that's where Purdue is right now. Will Alabama or Houston lose a game? I don't know. Right now, KenPom's metrics and how it projects out implied odds, it does have Purdue and Alabama both losing another game. It does not have Houston losing another game, and I'm checking on Kansas. It has Kansas losing another game. They go to TCU tomorrow. That will be a tough game. So you just kind of look at it, and it's all relative. Purdue's just got to keep winning. Purdue's going to be favored in every game the rest of the way, so you can feel good about that. Indiana at Wisconsin, then Illinois. I think if Purdue can win out in the regular season, if they can win those 3 games, I think you can feel pretty good going to Chicago that you're a 1 seed. That whatever happens at the United Center, that you're going to be a 1 seed. Now, I would not advise losing if Purdue's the 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament. I would not advise losing to the winner of the 8-9 game. I would never advise that, but avoid a bad loss, and you should feel pretty good about your chances of being a 1 seed. I don't know how much the committee ever puts in conference tournaments. I don't know that it's necessarily the best way to gauge teams. I don't think it's the same setup as a regular game, but nonetheless, it's a fun event. Purdue does have an uphill battle to get that South Region number 1 seed. They are clearly behind Alabama right now. Just no matter how you slice it, Alabama's been really good. They did have that weird loss to Oklahoma, but Oklahoma is just a little higher in KenPom than Northwestern, so not like it's a major difference. Purdue's just got to keep winning. That's all you can do, and that's all there really is to say at this point. I'd love to talk more about the tournament, but I don't have that much to say. As far as the Big Ten race goes, I'm recording this a little bit later than normal on Sunday because I wanted to wait to see what Northwestern did against Iowa. Northwestern ran through them easily. So right now, they're the only one within 2 games of Purdue. They're a game and a half back. They will go to Illinois on Thursday. So before Purdue plays Indiana, Northwestern will go to Illinois. If Northwestern loses that game, they will fall to 11-6 in Big Ten play, which would mean that Purdue could clinch a share of the conference title with a win over Indiana. We'll see what happens there. Right now, Purdue would need to win 2 more games to clinch a share, win 3 more to win it outright. That's assuming Northwestern wins out, which is probably, not going to happen, but hell, I've been wrong about Northwestern all season, so I should probably just shut up. We'll see what happens there. a lot of panic about Purdue lately. I've had so many people, it's happening again. Purdue's falling apart, yada, yada. Something to keep in mind here. And I was just thinking about what we've talked about on the podcast here in recent weeks during the Big Ten season. We talked about how since the Big Ten went to 20 games, that was the 18-19 season that they did that for the first time, no one's done better than 16-4 in the regular season. In that first year in 18-19, Purdue and Michigan State both went 16-4 and shared the league. And then in the COVID year, 2020-2021, Illinois went 16-4. That group with Ayo Dosunmu and Kofi Coburn, really good group there. No one else has gone 16-4. That's some pretty good company. And of course, I'm not saying Purdue's going to do it. They've got three tough games left, so it's too early to say that. But that's some pretty good company if you could match that. Even the teams that have gone 15-5, that's hard to do. You look across the country, winning 75% of your league games, it's hard to do, especially in a conference where the road is as difficult as the Big Ten. Some really tough road environments. I think an outright championship, outright Big Ten regular season championship would be a pretty big deal for this team. You look at this group, the guys on this team, and the entire team, minus David Jenkins and maybe Zach Edey, projects to come back next year. Now, could guys transfer? Yes. I'm not into projecting that yet. But especially for these young guys, for Braden Smith, for Fletcher Lawyer, for guys like Cam Heide and Will Berg and Brian Waddell to just be around it, since, they're not really playing. Trey Kaufman-Wren, Caleb First, all these guys to be a part of this. I think that bodes well for the future. I think that's something that, you see how important it is to take every game seriously and how hard it is to win a Big Ten title. I think it would be a big deal. And I know there's the crowd out there, and, I know some of you are listening because I'm good friends with you who, say only March matters. I don't care what happens, just, NCAA tournament, get to a Final Four. And that's valid. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that you're wrong for highlighting the NCAA tournament and its importance, but it's better to win the Big Ten than not to win the Big Ten. And when you have it there for the taking, I think it would be a really big deal for Purdue to close this thing out and squeeze everyone else out of it. So as I said, we're going to have another episode later this week to talk about the Indiana game, we'll preview that a little bit, and then anything else you guys would like. Please tweet questions in on Twitter at BoilersBeyond. We have plenty to talk about. We have an interesting stat that I'm going to talk about that one of you sent me related to Zach Edey's point totals. But please send anything you have over to me on Twitter at BoilersBeyond, because that's all I've got for today. Thank you guys, as always, for spending your time with me. I greatly appreciate you all. We'll be back here this week. Again, tweet your questions over. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and let me know what you think. Send anything over my way. Until next time, guys, it's the heart of the season, so enjoy all of the basketball and take care.